Hi, it's Colin Coward. I started The Volume to bring you some of the most authentic voices in sports. While you're here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks.
That game today was frustrating for a lot of different reasons. That came out with this incredible, intense effort, right? And all you Laker fans, you see right through that because we've seen it all season. This incredible, catastrophic loss for whatever reason, leading to all of this doom and gloom negativity. And then they almost always come out with like a weird, intense energy in the next game, like a denial type of energy. But it's so fake because it's not there when it actually has an opportunity to actually facilitate some sort of change in outcomes. That same effort is not there when the Lakers desperately need it. Instead, it comes when it's too late. Too little, too late is kind of a theme for the season. Like I said in the show the other day, it's a theme that I've seen consistently with this Laker team. They have tried all season long to tell us exactly who they are and what they're made of, what their championship character is. And the outlier examples have been the bits where the effort is sharp. The outlier examples have been when they've gone down kicking and screaming rather than laying down. Those are the outliers. The far more common scenario has been a lack of attention to detail, a lack of intensity, to go with all of this self-sabotage that we laid out in detail in Friday's show. And then, yeah, you've got a little bit of a second half lead. I think they were up by 7 at one point in that third quarter, but you knew what was going to happen. I was talking with my producers during the halftime show, and we were like, what's the over-under for points allowed by the Lakers in the second half? And we put it at 63.5, just kind of having fun with the guys talking, and they gave up 67. And they gave up 64 in the second half the other day against the Pelicans. When the chips are down and this team actually needs to get stops, they can't. Why? Because it's hard to get stops in the NBA, regardless of your personnel. There's a level of effort and focus, but there's also a level of like habits and instincts, and you have to build those. We talked about this with the Memphis Grizzlies the other day. The reason why the Grizzlies are defending so well is because from the top down, culturally within that franchise, there is an expectation to do your job within the defensive responsibilities of the team. So regardless of whether one guy's in or one guy's out, Jaren Jackson out, doesn't matter. Jaren Jackson's been like Anthony Davis for that team. Doesn't matter. Without him, they're still getting stops. It's because culturally, they have built that out as part of the team. And that culture did used to exist with the Lakers in the first 2 years of the LeBron and AD era. That's why when Anthony Davis went out, they did get a ton of stops. But this season, it's been utterly gone. And that's been a huge part of why when the chips are down and they actually need to get stops, they haven't been able to. And then the Russ AD pairing is an interesting pairing for a couple of different reasons. We saw this a lot early in the season when they lost those 2 games against the Oklahoma City Thunder. You saw them immediately put Lou Dort on Russell Westbrook, and you saw them put I can't remember who it was. They put a big, strong forward on Anthony Davis, and they just switched the screens every time. And because those guys were quicker than because Lou Dort, Russell Westbrook could not bully him physically, and because Anthony Davis doesn't have a quick first step, turned them both into jump shooters, and they just couldn't create shots at the end of the game. And so that was the reason why I wasn't optimistic, even when the score looked good today, is because you knew at any given moment Denver was going to lock it. And as soon as they did, what was inevitably going to happen is they weren't going to be able to get stops because they're not a disciplined defensive team, and they wouldn't be able to score because Russ puts up numbers. We're going to talk a little bit about Russ here in a minute. Russ is going to put up his numbers, but on key possessions and important moments of games, he's a guard that's very limited. And so if you can take away his ability to just get straight line drives to the basket, he doesn't really have a counter. And Anthony Davis, you can turn him into a guy who has to shoot over the top. So I didn't believe, even when this game was competitive, that they had much of a chance to win. And that's just the reality of their situation. It kind of felt like a waste to have Anthony Davis out there. He's in the first quarter looking amazing because Anthony Davis is an amazing basketball player. He's out there in the first quarter, subs out of the game, and he's got his shoe off on the sideline. Throughout the entire second half, he's limping around on the floor. And I admire Anthony Davis's competitiveness for wanting to be out there with his guys, for wanting to try. I admire that. But it's time. It's time to acknowledge the writing on the wall. I understand LeBron James has to play in 2 more games to qualify for the scoring title. I've talked about this in detail in the show. I have no issue with LeBron playing in those 2 games. This guy is a proven winner in this league. If he wants to establish statistical, markers for his career, I don't have any problem with that. Get LeBron his 2 games in, get him out, get Anthony Davis out. There's absolutely no point in having them out there with these injuries to the extent that it could risk something further. Because what's your worst case scenario now? Worst case scenario now is you lose the rest of the games this season, you miss the play-in tournament entirely, in its entirety, and you go into the offseason. Then what happens? LeBron and AD get healthy. So May and June, they get to rest up. Then all summer long, they get to work on their games. Meanwhile, the Lakers have an opportunity with their front office and ownership group to try to turn over the roster, get rid of as much of that negativity that's been plaguing this team, and try to reset for next year. And then you go into training camp in October, and it's a fresh start. And maybe you can undo the damage that you did this year to the reputation of the franchise and all of the bad taste that you put in the mouth of the fans this year. That's what you can do. That's the worst case scenario if you get these guys out of the lineup. But making Anthony Davis play with a bad wheel, having LeBron play more than the 2 games he wants to play to get his scoring title on a bad wheel, it's a dangerous risk. And we talk about this a lot on the show. It's like with Derrick Rose in 2012. The underlying story to the ACL tear was he was dealing with a bunch of foot and ankle stuff all season. You have a power line in your body. When you explode and when you land on the ground, you have to absorb impact, and you do that with your whole body. And so when one part of your body is hurting for whatever reason, you start to compensate by putting pressure on other parts of your body, and that's where other more serious injuries can happen. So again, if this team if this team had a realistic path to try to make something happen, then by all means, I get it. That's where it's about pushing your chips in the middle and going for it. But ever since that Pelicans game, when we saw Frank Vogel just throw in the trash everything that he learned about what this team was good at and what this team was bad at. I'm not going to get into that again because I went into it at length on Friday night, but Frank Vogel killed my belief in this team on Friday night. And I believe the same thing happened to LeBron. That's why he decided not to play. But at this point, acknowledge that light at the tunnel no longer exists and understand that there's more risk than there is reward having those guys out there. I admire Anthony Davis for what he did today. I just don't see the point anymore here. It's time to get him out of the lineup. It's time to get LeBron his 2 games that he needs. Those are great. If you're looking for great betting opportunities, LeBron's next 2 games, bet his over on the points because he's going to go out there and he's going to gun to score. It'll be really interesting to see which games he plays in. I don't see the point in playing him against Phoenix, maybe Oklahoma City, maybe Denver. It'll be interesting to see which games he plays in, but I think he's going to get his last 2 in and then he's going to be done. So as far as like a eulogy goes for the Lakers, I want to get into this in a lot of detail at some point, probably this offseason, or maybe if we run into a little break at some point. But I want to, I've got to meet a lot of Lakers fans during my time covering this team. And one of them in particular, Damin Rangula, good friend of mine, he used to blog for Silver Screen and Roll. Now he's more of just like a figurehead within the Laker fan base. And I've appreciated his honesty this season with the way that he's covered the team. There's a lot of apologists out there that are Lakers fans. And I don't have any issue with people who are apologists. It's just, to me, it's not authentic. And I'm always drawn to people who are more authentic, people that are more willing to call things the way they see them. He wrote an article this morning. He broke out of writing retirement and wrote an article this morning talking about how this was basically his least favorite Lakers team that he's ever rooted for. And in it, he talked about how the Laker franchise in general is obsessed with star power. And when they're making their decisions, and it extends all the way from the top down, it's very frequently not about what qualifications a person has or what the specific job needs, but it's rather more of like a parochial, like we're friends or we're family or we have a loyalty to you for one reason or another. It's a really strange dynamic that surrounds the franchise. And in a weird way, it has poisoned everything that they've tried to accomplish in the last couple of years. Look down the roster. or look down the organization. You've got Jeannie Buss, who's literally an owner who inherited the franchise, right? And then you go to Rob Pelinka, your president of basketball operations. This is a guy who literally was given the job because he was Kobe's agent. He's far and away one of the probably a bottom third GM in the league in terms of his willingness to put in the work, his willingness to dive into the weeds of scouting talent around the NBA, watching tons of NBA basketball so that you understand what's working and what's not working. That's not a strength of his. And then going down to the coaching staff, you've got Frank Vogel, who's literally in the job because they weren't willing to pay the better coach, which was Ty Lue. And he's still in the job right now. The only reason they didn't fire him, in my opinion, is because they're not wanting to pay him and he's under contract, which will be a whole other thing that they're going to have to deal with this offseason. But it extends down the roster. Instead of looking at how you won the title in 2020, which was LeBron James, Anthony Davis, playing at the peak of their powers with really high quality role players around. And these role players were filling very specific responsibilities that needed to be filled around LeBron James and Anthony Davis. But instead of acknowledging that, which they basically fell backwards into, they wanted Kawhi Leonard. Now, Kawhi Leonard's so good that it might have worked out anyway. But they kind of fell ass backwards into the right role players in 2020. But ever since then, all they've done is undo that because of their obsession with that star power, with that familiarity. It's not find a good 3-and-D guy to come in and play a role. It's former Laker Trevor Ariza. It's not find a player that allows you to facilitate more LeBron and AD at the 4-5 lineups. Instead, it's here comes Dwight Howard again, because we remember he was on a team that we used to have when we won the title. It's a lot of here's Avery Bradley, here's familiarity, here's older veteran players, guys that we have this sentimental attachment to. Carmelo Anthony, I talked a lot about him on Twitter today because he hasn't shot the ball well, basically for the last 2/3 of the season. And with all of the issues that you have with him defensively, it just doesn't make sense for him to be on the court. But if you really trim all the fat and you look back and you see that they have these two core pieces in LeBron James and Anthony Davis that are still very much the right core pieces that you want if you're going to try to win a championship. But everything around that, those decisions are being made with the wrong priorities. They're being made with the priorities of star power and familiarity and nepotism and all of those things that I just talked about. That has to be killed.